The last 4 wars that the United States has engaged in, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Ukraine, we have lost each and every one of them. The enemy in Vietnam was the Communist Party of North Vietnam. What rules in Vietnam today? The Communist Party of North Vietnam. They won. We lost. In Afghanistan, the enemy was the Taliban. Who rules Afghanistan today? The Taliban. They won. We lost. I could go on, but you get the picture. And if you were not bamboozled by American mass media, you would know what everyone else in the world knows, which is that the war in Ukraine is over. The Russians won, and Ukraine and the West were defeated. He's spelling out a pattern we keep pretending not to see. Vietnam lost. Afghanistan lost. Iraq lost. And now Ukraine, same trajectory. The enemies we fought still rule the countries we invaded. That's not coincidence. That's strategy failure. In simple terms, we keep starting wars for goals we can't define and outcomes we can't achieve. And the world sees the truth even if our media won't say it out loud. The war is effectively over. Russia won. The West lost. And denial won't change the scoreboard. Along the way, the United States went from the dominant economic power, which gathered around it allies, the G7, the Group of Seven. Just so we're all clear, that includes Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and the United States. For much of the last 75 years, the U.S. and its allies were arguably the center of the world economy. But no longer. What this really shows is the end of Western monopoly. For 70 years, the G7 acted like the control room of the world economy. But history never lets one group stay on top forever. Rome learned it. Britain learned it. And now the US-led order is learning it. While the West guarded old power, the rest of the world quietly built new power. That's why the center of gravity is shifting, and it's not coming back. In the year 2020, another economic powerhouse caught up. That powerhouse caught up. That powerhouse is the People's Republic of China and its allies, known as BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The group is much bigger than 5 now, but those 5 gave it its name. If you add up the GDP of the United States and its G7 allies in 2020, it was roughly equal to the GDP of China and its BRICS allies. Since 2020, the growth of China and its allies has meant that the gap has grown larger each year, and it will continue to grow in the foreseeable future. This is the moment the West didn't see coming. For years, BRICS was treated like a side group, not a serious competitor. But when China and its partners matched the G7's output in 2020, the game changed. Since then, the gap has only widened, not because BRICS is anti-West, but because they're building faster, trading smarter, and focusing on growth instead of geopolitical drama. The world isn't unipolar anymore. It's becoming balanced, and the West is struggling to adjust. China and its allies have been growing faster than the United States every year for the last 25 years. They have now caught up and gone further. If you add up the GDP of the United States and its allies, it's about 28% of world output. If you do the same for China and the BRICS allies, it's about 35% of the world's output. We are not the economic powerhouse of the world. We are not the richest country. We're not any of those things our leaders keep repeating like a mantra, as if saying it enough times will make it true. That's not confidence. That's denial. Change exists whether you deny it or not. Every country and every company engaged in world trade is rethinking its strategy to account for where the wealth now is. And it's in China and the BRICS growing faster than in the so-called mature economies of the United States and the West. The shift is real, and pretending otherwise won't stop it. Every serious business and government already knows where the momentum is, toward the BRICS markets, not the old Western ones. Growth attracts strategy, and strategy follows opportunity. If wealth is moving east, global planning will too. That's exactly what's happening behind closed doors, no matter what politicians say in public. For the first time in your lifetime, for everyone watching or listening, the United States has a powerful, successful competitor. We haven't had that before. After World War II, all rivals were laid prostrate. But now we have an enormously successful, rapidly growing powerhouse. China. That changes everything. This is the first real rival the US has had in our lifetime. A competitor it can't dominate or ignore. And when a peer shows up, the old playbook stops working. This year, the United States might grow its GDP by around 2%. China's growth is closer to 5%. That's relentless. Russia didn't win the war in Ukraine by itself. It won because right behind it stands China. When the United States and Europe thought they could cripple Russia by refusing to buy its oil and gas, Russia simply turned to India and China, and they said yes. Sanctions were supposed to isolate Russia, but instead they exposed Western limitations. Only Americans take these threats seriously because they don't want to face the reality being described here. We are in a new world, and denial is not an adequate response. The world didn't freeze when the West imposed sanctions. It rerouted. China and India became Russia's economic backup, and the entire Western strategy collapsed. You can't isolate a country when half the world refuses to participate. We are headed on a collision course. Trump campaigned on ending endless wars, but Ukraine continued, Gaza wasn't fixed, and instead of de-escalation we saw threats against Iran, Mexico, Canada, Denmark, Nigeria, Venezuela. This isn't restraint. It's militarism spiraling out of control. That's how Russia, China, and much of the world see it. A desperate attempt to reclaim lost authority through force. Which brings us to tariffs. A tariff is a tax, plain and simple. It's a tax on goods produced outside the United States and sold inside it. The stated goal was to bring jobs back and reduce borrowing. But tariffs only hit importing businesses, which then pass the cost on to consumers. This is the contradiction nobody wants to call out. Tariffs were sold as patriotism, but they function as hidden taxes. Businesses were given tax cuts first, then tariffs were imposed. The result? Companies come out fine. Ordinary Americans pay more. That's why inflation continues. Importers raise prices, retailers pass them on, and the public absorbs the cost. That is the reality whether anyone wants to admit it or not. And Mr. Trump's advisors should have known this, because tariffs are hundreds of years old. I teach courses in international trade, and a section of the course is devoted to tariffs. We teach students based on the experience of many countries over many years, when tariffs work and when they fail. Mr. Trump presented the tariff as though it were an unquestionable good thing. It isn't. It wasn't. And he counted on the American media not to teach you what they could have and what they should have. That happens a lot. What did the tariff do? This is another part of our dilemma. The tariff was a declaration by the United States of economic war against every other country in the world. This is an astounding thing to do. If you haven't understood that, you haven't been paying attention. It tells the world, if you want to do business in the United States, you have to pay a tax to get to us. That is not the behavior of the empire we once were, the one that said, we believe in free trade, and we're going to make the world a place where anyone with a good idea can start a business and prosper. No, all of that is gone. Now it's simple. If you want to do business in the United States, you pay a tax. Let me give you an example that affects your life, even if you may not have realized it. About 15 years ago, a competition began around the world. Who could produce the best, cheapest electric vehicle? A car or truck that runs on electricity instead of gasoline. Everyone knows Elon Musk is one of the richest men in the world because he entered that market early. But he didn't win the competition. That's why Tesla is in the trouble it's in now. The competition was won by a Chinese company you may not have heard of. It's called BYD, three initials that stand for Build Your Dream. The BYD Corporation produces, by far, the best quality and cheapest electric cars and trucks. Are they sold around the world? Yes. Have they been sold globally for years? Yes. In Paris, they're part of the taxi fleet. So why haven't you seen them in the United States? Because in his first term, Mr. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on them. Mr. Biden, not to be outdone, raised that tariff to 100%, which is what it is now. That means a car that costs $30,000 suddenly costs $60,000 for an American consumer. $30,000 for the car and $30,000 for the tariff paid to the U.S. government. No rational buyer is going to do that. Instead, Americans settle for a lower quality vehicle and pay $40,000 or $50,000 to Ford, GM, Tesla, or another domestic manufacturer. That is very bad for the United States. Why? Because everywhere else in the world, competitors can buy the best quality electric vehicles at the lowest price, around $30,000. Only Americans are forced to pay much more for something worse. That means the competition is effectively over for us. The very steps taken to protect the country end up hurting it. This is the real problem with tariffs. They don't protect America. They weaken it. The rest of the world buys the best electric vehicles for $30,000 while Americans pay double. We call it strategy, but it's really self-inflicted damage. There has been no rush of companies relocating to the United States. They know tariffs can be imposed, removed, raised, or lowered within weeks. This week, the whole world laughed when Switzerland managed to reduce its tariff from 39% to 15%. And how did they do it? They gave Mr. Trump a gold bar engraved with the dates of his presidency, worth $130,000. They gave the gift and the tariff was reduced. The rest of the world laughed because elsewhere that behavior has a name: bribery. Our media may mention it briefly, but it's part of the larger denial. We've reached a point where a foreign government can spend what is pocket change to them and achieve a major policy outcome. We are for sale. None of this is unusual for a declining empire. And this is my final point. A declining empire usually flames out by going to war to try to recoup through violence what it can no longer maintain through economic or political strength. Those wars usually go badly. Toward the end of the Roman Empire, the Romans referred to the people moving into their territory as savages and wild tribes. They were nothing of the sort. They were simply winning, and Rome, after centuries of dominance, could not accept that its time was over. What this exposes is how predictable the system has become. Tariffs aren't strategy. They're leverage for whoever can flatter or pay their way in. When foreign governments realize the United States can be influenced with gifts instead of negotiations, it signals something deeper. We're no longer respected, we're managed. That's how great powers decline, not with one catastrophic mistake, but with a series of small humiliations that everyone notices except the people in charge. Today, we are a nation that has designated China as its great adversary, yet cannot end the war in Ukraine even while knowing it has been lost. The war continues to consume money, lives, and leaves that country in devastating condition. We now face a stark choice. Either we continue on this path which leads toward a war with China and the BRICS, a war the United States cannot win, or we choose a different course. China and the BRICS together represent more than half the world's population and possess nuclear weapons, likely as many as or more than ours. The United States is about 4.5% of the world's population. The United States and the G7 together are under 20%. It's over. What follows our decline will either be a Chinese-led empire, or, if we are fortunate, a genuinely multinational order like the United Nations was meant to be, a cooperative framework that prevents the repetition of the history I've just described. Those are the real choices. And despite everything, I am not pessimistic. I am cautiously optimistic. Slowly, painfully, and unevenly, a new political initiative is forming in this country. One that tells the truth and calls for a new political direction and new leadership. That leadership must be willing to sit down with Chinese counterparts, because both sides need to avoid a clash from which there would be no recovery. Nuclear war. If we take the initiative, we may find partners on the other side willing to meet us halfway. The strongest argument for this strategy is simple. It is better than every alternative. This should worry us more than anything else. When foreign governments can lower tariffs with gifts, policy is no longer driven by strategy but by personal influence. Once the world understands that, it stops treating you like a superpower and starts treating you like a transaction. The larger point is clear. A country that cannot control its own impulses cannot control global outcomes. Every path we are on now leads to one of two futures: escalation or cooperation. And cooperation may be the only option left that does not end in disaster.